So staff LFY. So this is looking at the staff part of LFY. And I'm on the wrong slide. Why? Sorry, I was here we go. So this is what the old LFY page looked for login, and it's definitely kind of a landing page as opposed to a home page. So it was the same for every student. It's not personalized. I mean, it has options that then show personal information, but it's very, I don't know. To me, it feels like when I was in secondary school learning how to use Dreamweaver to make web pages, what we would have looked at in the 90s. So we have the student homepage on LFY that now when you first log in, this is what a student will see. We've got a dummy student account. That's one of our members of staff in the Salesforce team, but it'll show teaching today. They've got tabs for my studies, my adjustments, personal details, document requests, other services. There's also now a student well-being tab that is separate from my adjustments. So they can go on to that tab and book a well-being appointment, which is the kind of entryway into counseling. So if you have any students that you would like, that you think should talk to someone about their mental health or well-being, there's now a tab on LFY, and for a well-being appointment, which is their entry appointments, they can book the appointment straight away. So they go and tell us why they want to see somebody, and they exit that with an appointment in hand, which is positive. And if the My Adjustments tab is there for all students, so if they don't have adjustments, it will just say, hey, if you think you need support, fill out this form and we'll get you started. And if they do have adjustments in place, they can see it, they can see the evidence, they can see who can see their My Adjustments, so they can see that you can see that, all of those sorts of things. So things that we'll be adding are appointment reminders. So SSD, so Student Services Center, Student Wellbeing Service, PhD Academy, are all live with some elements of self-service booking appointments, and students will be able to see those appointments that they have, be able to cancel or reschedule them. LYF will come on board, and more areas are going to come from there. We'd like to be able to push some relevant information and possibly events. So, your exam timetable will be coming out. Results are about to be released, that sort of thing, on student homepage. And then we're potentially thinking about whether we use some learner analytics to do some nudges. We're not there yet, but that's something that we'll be looking at kind of further down the line. So this is what the staff page looks like. So when you're logging in, so similar to the student, what is today's upcoming teaching, and what's kind of further on from that. There'll be a nudge for any incomplete registers so that you can see as a teacher where you need to fill that out, whether there are any pending changes of circumstances. So being able to see your course timetable on the right, being able to email either an individual student or a group of students, being able to see your mentees, and then being able to view student adjustments and acknowledge those adjustments you have access to. There's also additional ways to see that, and I've heard in some of the feedback that some of you have seen those already, which hopefully is helpful. So if you're looking at a registers class view, what's so hopefully relatively similar to where that is, but being able to indicate whether a student has attended or not, and looking at the information about the student, but also the how to do. See if I can. This right here, that little bell symbol on the underneath the student's picture indicates that that student has adjustments. So where we haven't done before is indicated that in any sort of way to departments. And the idea behind this is kind of twofold. One is if you think you should have adjustments, a view of someone's adjustments, and you don't, right? Then so if you tried to click on it or saw it in class adjustments, and you didn't have access to this individual student's adjustments, then you should talk to your departmental circulator. So each academic department has a departmental circulator who shares access to adjustments. So you should talk to that person and say, hey, I think I should see this student's adjustments and I can't. But also, if you know of a student who has a disability, and you think that they should have adjustments, you'll be able to tell right away, hey, does this person have it? So if Ethan was your student and you didn't see that signal underneath Ethan's name, you could be talking to Ethan and saying, hey, you don't have any adjustments set up. It might be good for you to, reach out to the student wellbeing service and get some adjustments set up. And there's no, this is not something that you need to do. This is not you should be checking every student and cross-checking whether or not they have that. But hopefully these might be helpful prompts if you're like, actually, this student clearly would benefit from adjustments or is talking to me about disabilities, or I can see that they're in a wheelchair and interesting to me that they don't have this. There's an easy way for you to kind of look at that. So it's definitely not meant to replace any of the proactive work that Student Wellbeing Services is doing to try to get students to come in and tell us. But it might help do just a bit of cross-checking or catching any gaps if there are any. So this is hopefully what will help with answering some of the questions. So let's start with what's remaining in old LFY, so the bottom part of the screen. So course selection is remaining in old LFY. There is a course selection project that is happening, and but it's still in early stages. So when we get additional information on course selection and when that project goes through, you'll absolutely hear more about it. But for right now, that is staying exactly where it was before. So postgraduate seminar sign-up functions will remain in old LFY. UG class group change requests, UG timetable clashes app, the PhD log, and lecture capture requirements will all stay in old LFY for right now. So what is in new LFY, which plan for the release happened, is the homepage, the student or course search, being able to email either by classes, individual students, or by your mentee groups, completing registers, and as you'll have seen on this example, student pictures are on the class register, so hopefully that helps as well. Staff teaching timetables, formative assessments, mentee teacher feedback, and general course class grades, ability to view student timetables, registers, and other details, and then some reporting functions. And as we've talked about, we've added in my adjustments, and as we showed on a couple pages ago, the changes of circumstances is also going to be on there. So hopefully more in one spot, or less places to have to look at, although there is still obviously some things in the old LFY. I think. So just in terms of what students and staff see for results. So right now, students don't have a results screen in LFY, and their results are emailed to them directly. The results screen for staff hasn't come in to new LFY yet. You can see provisional results, but you need to go into old LFY to see final results for students. We are looking at getting historic results visible, but we'll continue to email in-year or relevant provisional results, and we'll put on historic results onto staff LFY, and then we're moving towards having all results in the new student and new staff LFY. So the plan is to move to there, but it's a staged step just due to the kind of complicated bit of where it sits in SITS and how we move that into Salesforce. So that's the kind of next bit of LFY. So ideally, what we would like is what a results tab would look like for a student, where they're seeing their results, where they can see individual marks along the side, where they could see kind of specific ERDAP results, and then some text around like, what does this mean for the student? So based on what's happened here, what are your next steps? What do you need? What do we need you to do? Is it a decision? Is it just actually, this is your option? So because it's in Salesforce, it can do more of those things than we could do in old LFI, which is really positive. So this is where we want to be moving to, and where we're working on moving to. So what we do now is a quite long email that has it can be kind of scary to read. It's quite, and the text here will still be, formal in some of its language, as we're talking about big parts of their academic course. But how can we help make sure that it is really easy for them to see, okay, a decision is needed, now click here to make that decision, or if you want advice, here's where you can get help. If this is upsetting for you and you'd like to talk to someone about your well-being, here's where you can get support. Those sorts of things are what we're coming up next. And I think that's, oh no. And then the last bit, and this is an example of the student engagement record that the student well-being services use. And again, this is a dummy student from when we were testing it in July 2021, but it's very, like, it hasn't changed in terms of tabs. But what is really helpful, and so this is where, and part of where I'd like some feedback from you guys as to whether you think that this would be helpful or wouldn't. And we're a ways away from it, so I'm not hopefully promising, I'm definitely not promising anything, but I'd be really interested in if you think this would be helpful. So within student well-being services, and these tabs would be adjusted to what you would need to see as a mentor. But on the main student tab, you can see the student details, including their picture. So this information would be changed to show, I guess, their academic department information. You can see the program that they're on, what year they're in, whether they're on an interruption, whether they're repeating the year, all of those things. Under relationships, for student well-being service, we can see their academic mentor, and we can see who their lead advisor is. And then there's information on other related tabs that just has their emergency contact details and some information about their disability that we can see. So there's questions on what we would show to academic mentors, and I'd be interested in hearing any initial thoughts, but if we did this and rolled it out, this is not the only opportunity, and by far it's not the kind of formal opportunity on this. So a student's My Adjustments is set up there, and we would, so as an academic mentor, you would be able to see that straightforward. Evidence would probably not be added because that's something that we use for seeing their medical evidence. So not necessarily relevant here, but I think appointments, notes, and cases might really be helpful. So for appointments, it's just a log of any appointment that the student has had, whether they showed up or not, when it was, and what happened there. And the notes are exactly as that sounds. So we keep records of the notes that we have. So I had a conversation with this student. The student came in to see me at our meeting. This is what happened. And it's all, I think it's, for me, one of the nicest things is that it's all there in one spot. It's on the student record. I can see it. I can see all the other information. So as a manager, it's really helpful. And then cases are just emails. That's the Salesforce word for emails. So any emails that the student sends to the student well-being service go automatically into there, as opposed to sending it from an individual disability advisor or mental health advisor's email address. The risk tab, again, is student well-being specific, and requests are just the file to hold any forms that they've sent us. So their registration form with us or their adjustments form. So this is what we're thinking might be helpful for academic mentors. But again, we're at early stages. We know that this is something that we're looking at for the new departmental senior student advisors, and them using something like this for them to keep notes of that. But that's the kind of, that's sort of where we are right now. So I'm going to stop sharing. And I think before I get to the questions on here, I want to just go through the questions that I had noted and see whether we're looking at it. So there was a question about a handbook or booklet for students and for staff. I know that we did run a lot of training sessions, and I can't remember what they called them. It was like pop in and see, or anyway, we ran some sessions. So where are they? But yes, we'll have a look at what kind of advice and things we're show and tell sessions were they called, so we can see what information was given and what guides, and make sure that if there are any, that we're sharing it with this group, and thinking about how we publicize that more widely. Hopefully we've seen how to access student timetables. Mega, I want to pick up with you separately about your access and make sure that we get that sorted. And in terms of who has access, that was a decision. There were some decisions that were these posts will automatically be done. And I know that there were some opportunities. So I want to look into that a little bit further. I don't know what exactly was decided and whether that was decided by department or just these specific roles. But so I want to have a look at that question and come back to you guys. And then hopefully we've answered course selection, but it's staying on old LFY. Can see that there are 2 hands. So Judith.
Very quickly, yes, you asked about whether it would be useful. We can't have too much information, especially when it's laid out clearly. Academic mentors can decline to use it or not. We as departmental and undergraduate tutors can note it to them, but it's really useful and excellent that this is a great step forward. I do have a question which you may wish simply to take back. Others might comment on it. As you know, with the new centralized deferments, there has been an increasing number of ones we would not in the past have ourselves approved. But I'm sure they have reasons, and we know the increase in student mental health issues. There's no doubt about that. We were told by Pete Evanson that I should say across my inbox is filled with the CC of notifications to the students. It was depressing some last week. And we are told by Pete that we can't learn about the cause of those because of confidentiality reasons. I understand the need on documentation and so on. I just wonder if some way around that could be organized so that mentors would be aware when there are issues, because unfortunately, only my estimate is about 50% of these deferments even mentioned it to the mentor. I've had to keep forwarding it to them. And by the way, I don't see why the mentor is not copied into those, not just to save me the forwarding, because I do useful things then, but also to elevate the role of the mentor. So having that would be a very simple thing to organize logistically, and would again emphasize to students who that the mentor is an important first point of call. So, but yes, please, that's wonderful information, whether or not you can give us everything that we want. Oh, one more thing. It would be useful. Will their exam timetables be online in future? So
in the staff view?
Yes, or in any view at all, yes?
Yeah, so that is a good question. Let me come back to you on that. I know that it is it's there as a student view, so I'm not aware of what it was like in the past. But that's a good question, and I'll see if that's part of the project. I did want to ask just a follow-up before I move on to Stephanie about, so you were talking about wanting to know more about, you said wanting to know more about that when with regards to deferrals and understanding something about evidence, but I'm not 100% sure I've understood what it is you'd like to see more of or know more about with regards to those deferrals. Judith?
I'm thinking.
Okay, sorry. I realized that then I didn't necessarily say who
it could be anything from gastroenteritis to depression.
So you want to see the reason that they applied for the deferral.
That's right. In a
Okay.
generic way, to the limit that confidentiality allows.
Yeah. Okay. I can see where there's some tricky bits to that.
They certainly are.
Because really anything to do with health is gonna get
Yes,
into a really tricky bit. Um,
yes.
so, but
Well,
let
I'm
me
just
have a look
asking
at that
for
and I'll take that away.
consultation to look into it, along with some other discussion, perhaps after EARDOP, about what has happened in what I see without data is an expansion of the ease of deferrals, almost back to the COVID period. So just examining how we can best help the students jointly. And so you'll have to take it up. We'll all have to discuss it and think about it.
Absolutely. And one of the things we want to look at, since we've just introduced this, is what is happening to this. And is it, is it making it easier for you because we're processing it in the center, or actually is it not? And is there a change in the number of deferrals? And if there is that happening at departmental level or at school level? Because I think there's also something about, and part of the centralizing is making sure that we're, because it's one team now looking at all of those, are we slightly more even across the piece? And so does that mean potentially that the numbers are roughly the same percentages, but they're different and possibly markedly different in individual departments? Or is it that actually this team isn't doing it at the same level that you guys would, and we need to learn from that? So that there's definitely a review planned for looking at centralized deferrals.
Yes, I'm sure all of us welcome the comparisons. We've seen them before, and on repeat teaching, all these issues. My concern is not on, I'm happy to make it harder for us if it makes it better for the students. Our own concern is that we had never before had final fails, and they seem to come from the serial deferrals, as we call them. And I will discuss this briefly, but write more about it in my presentation on procrastination in the education symposium, because I am looking at the larger psychological literature. It does seem to me that we may be encouraging an atmosphere of procrastination, which is not better for the students. And yet we want to be flexible at the same time. It's a dilemma.
Yeah,
And
how
I
do we
don't
support them through that?
That's right. There's no easy answer. I would have tended to think that um, we need to be able to authorize last minute deferrals, but I would have thought that ones that are not last minute should actually ask for some consultation, because in the past I was able to talk students out of deferring. Now I don't get a chance, and in fact, by the time I know about it, it's too late because it's irrevocable. Which I think actually should not be part of the flexible policy. The irrevocability of the deferral asked for a week in advance, for example. Students do have second thoughts on that. So,
Yeah,
but
and
anyway,
these are
again,
all, I'm writing these all down. So
they're all
looking at,
your plate. Welcome and to this can of worms.
no,
But
but this is the thing, right? Like we're doing this, we're hoping that this makes it easier, that this is a more consistent student experience, that there are things where, and this is definitely happening. So what I know, as managing student wellbeing service and SSC, that when someone does defer, if there are mental health stuff getting, if it's coming up in that they're letting the student wellbeing service know and saying, are you aware of the student? Have you been in touch? If you haven't, you should reach out. So there are things that are getting picked up in that way, which are positive. Are we doing it all? Have we got it right? I'm not 100% sure. So these are all things to look at when we review this, after we've gone through this exam period. probably before RDAP, just so that we can think about what changes we want to implement, but we'll keep RDAP in mind as we go through as well. I'm going to go over to Stephanie next.
Yeah, thanks. I got I'll take my hand down. I've got just something like feedback on the appointment side of things that might be worth keeping in mind is when I arrived, we were really pushed towards Student Hub, which has note-taking facilities in it. So I don't know if that would link up with new LFY.
So there's they don't link up, unfortunately, no. And there's no plan for that to happen.
Yeah, so that's something where it gets a bit confusing, I think, for mentors, like what are we meant to be using? And I like was mentioned earlier, I talked about how I use like the notes function in Student Hub and then kind of put them into a spreadsheet so that I have something where I can actually organize it and look, like you say, like have a list of my meetings and what we spoke about last, but then also record it in a way that's kind of like backing it up to a service that, like, if my Excel spreadsheet explodes, that I still have it. So I think maybe something to maybe talk to the Student Hub people about is taking off that notes function and maybe just signposting to new LFY, because otherwise it's just like, it's a lot.
And that's a good point. And I guess there's also the bit on when we get, so the kind of full notes function, there's providing feedback, but I guess the full notes function isn't quite there yet. So how do we keep these all in mind and what's the right way? But I think you're right around how are we looking at where that is kept and how we signpost people.
Yeah, definitely. Because I try and use it, like when I keep on top of it, just so I have two versions of stuff.
But also, we don't really want you to be doing two versions of things.
No, I know.
So I think it's good to not like lose stuff or to be, but like in an ideal world, we're doing it in one place and we're confident in the system so that nobody is doing duplicate work. So
that would be nice.
That is what I'd rather push for, that rather than say, let's keep it in Student Hub and LFY.
It was just trying to make the best of a situation to make it work for me, because Student Hub doesn't really present the information in a way that's useful to me. And the notes function is just like, unless I'd use like semicolons to put it into a spreadsheet and then divide it into columns, and it's just ridiculous. But
so the Salesforce is much better at that, I think.
I just think it would just need something so that not to put notes in it or take it away. I'm sure they can do that. And then just to come back on the kind of points Judith was making about deferring, I think I quite often say to students, because I deal with such a large cohort, sometimes they don't want to tell me what's going on, and it's very, very personal. So I always I let them come to me with the reason, like, would you like to talk about it? Yes or no? Only a very small handful of students don't talk to me about it. But I think the fact that it's a process outside of the department and outside of like a personal, for some it's okay, but it's like one size doesn't fit all. So I think having that really clear signposting, you're like, if you're going to defer, like almost check a box, like, if you want to, have you spoken to your mentor about this? Like with the kind of interruption and the visa thing, just so that they're kind of like forced to think, actually, maybe it would be helpful to talk to somebody, because in like 9 out of 10 cases, it definitely is. But there's maybe 1 out of 10 cases where it's like, actually, that would be quite uncomfortable for some students. So
that's a good point. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Yeah, and it's I think it's a tricky, because one of the things we're trying to do within student well-being service is say, remove some of that stigma and discrimination. You should be talking about your mental health. Everybody has a state of mental health, all the things that you all know. And talking about it is not, it's we're a confidential service, but we also want you to give us permission, or we want you to share that information. We're not like, how does that work? So I think, how are we thinking about on that deferral form saying, have you talked to your academic mentor about this, or have you considered sharing this with something like that would be positive, again, in kind of demything some of this. Anything else?
I have a question. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. And I guess my question is about how the data of academic mentoring meetings is recorded in the system, and how easy is to extract that data later on. For instance, if you want to get some stats on how many meetings are happening, and then obviously some of the meetings might not be recorded in the system, and what's the policy at the school level around keeping records on academic mentoring meetings from your side?
I can see a thumbs down. I'm not sure what that reaction was from, Daniela. But hopefully that's, but yeah, so I think there is something on what the policy is and what that looks like. And I think we'll, I mean, that's not I guess that's not an LFY project policy, right? So who keeps notes and what you keep notes on is is a decision, whether that's for this, whether it's for this group, whether that's for Eden. But that's definitely not a kind of student services decision on what you have to do. What I will say is that one of the things that I love most about Salesforce is the reporting. So the dashboards, so we have kind of regular dashboards, and those are things that I think we need to look at how we bring those in for staff and how we bring that in for students. So and that's kind of going back to learner analytics for students. But as a manager of student wellbeing services, I can see, how many emails came in today and what were the primary topics of these emails. How many my adjustments have we issued this year? How many students have told us about a disability but haven't gotten my adjustments? How many appointments have we delivered in person, online, blah, 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 blah. So I think that there is definitely scope to look at that. I know that that didn't happen in this part of this because as you all know, the reason that we did this change was due to the tech vulnerabilities of LFY after we were hacked. And so the decision was made to do a straight up lift and shift. So there's a little bit extra with my adjustments and pictures because those were the super easy things to put in because those were already in Salesforce. So it took zero development work to do that. But stuff around some of the reporting isn't huge amounts of development work, but it is definitely there. So I'm going to pick that up with Louise. Louise is the change delivery manager for the LFY project. So I'll ask her about reporting and what you guys can see and what might be in scope for that, because I do think that is really helpful. And I really like being able to, so as a manager, I can see a ton, but my individual advisors can pull up a list of all of their students that they're a disability advisor for, and whether those students have my adjustment set up, whether those students, when was the last time that student had an appointment, all of those kinds of things. So it would be reasonable for those things to kind of get set up for you guys. I don't know if that doesn't come until we get the student engagement portal or if that is something that can come earlier. And the only reason I'm saying I don't know is just because there, as we've seen, there are lots of things that we could do, and we have limited resource time and kind of Salesforce developer resource to do all of the different things. So how does it get fit in? But I mean, this is the plan, and it's good to hear that you guys would be interested in that, because that also helps us make a case for let's continue to build. But the school is definitely, very keen on using Salesforce, which is great, and on growing it. And I think this kind of sense of an almost 360-degree view of a student, so that we're all putting information into the same place, and we're thinking about what other departments can see, right? So should I be able to, if I'm a mental health advisor, should I be able to see the academic mentor notes from a last appointment? Probably not, because I feel like that's not necessarily needed. But should I be able to see whether or not you've met with your academic mentor? That might be slightly more helpful in terms of suggesting whether, suggestions with students. There's and I agree with Judith in many ways, like the more information we have, the better we can do stuff. But there is a slight sense of the more information you have, is that forcing you to pick up more things, to carry more things, to feel the kind of weight of that? Does it get overwhelming with the amount of information you have, and does it kind of stop from being able to do stuff? So I think we're still trying to figure that out, and all of us across the school will be involved in those conversations as we go down the line of, when we're developing an academic mentor engagement record. You guys will be involved in what you need on that and what you should be able to see. And if you're asking for data on what else LYF workshops the student has been to, then someone from LYF will be involved in that conversation. If it's about what student well-being service information you have access to, someone from my team will be involved in that conversation, and we'll kind of work that out in the same way that if we wanted to see notes from academic mentors, we'd be coming back to this group or some other way of involving and engaging. And so just because we can give insane amounts of information doesn't necessarily mean that we should. And I agree with Stephanie's point that although we want to get rid of stigma and discrimination, it is still there. There are still students who are really careful about what they tell us. I mean, there are students who won't come to us for counseling because they think that it's going to appear on their transcripts. And while that's absolutely not the case, and we're trying to do some myth busting around that, we also want to make sure that we're not driving students away because we don't want students to not go to you because then their counselor will see that information. Or, I mean, counseling notes are legally protected, but not to come see a mental health advisor because you can see the notes about their current mental health difficulties. So those are all things that we need to work out and interesting conversations to have as we go through things. Sorry, I can see.
Oh. Yeah.
A very quick one, and I think it picks up on one of the points you've just raised. So perhaps it's just a clarification. And at the minute, I've had a bit of a tool around with new LFY, and kind of departmental stuff, course level stuff, that kind of thing. We can't currently run reports on individual students to give us a sense of overall course attendance in the way that we used to be able to do with old LFY. Is that right?
Ooh, that I don't know. So and apologies, I probably should have brought another colleague into this and I definitely should have started with an introduction. So I know some of you from my previous role. Well, first I started working in residences, and then for the last 3 years, I've been managing the student well-being service across the school. And as of 2 months ago, I'm now head of student services. So I also manage SSC as well as student well-being service. So I took over from Martin Annis, who's moved over to managing some projects across the school, which is that's the shortest way. I'm the new Martin Annis. So the LFY changes happened before I started, so I'm less au fait with the departmental screens than Louise is, or Pete and Martin. So some of these I'm gonna take back to them and come back with questions on some students have timetable stuff, the access, and I'll add to that the reporting on student attendance. I know that was an issue when it first came up, and I thought that it had been resolved, but if you can't still see it, Paul, then I will find out if and it might be that, yeah. So I'm not, but I don't know enough to be definitive. I know that there was an issue with it, and I had seen some messages that have been resolved, but I also definitely didn't do a deep dive into it. So I will come back on that thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? Cool.
Okay. Thank you so much, Victoria, for taking the time, and we're getting close to the end of the meeting. I think it was very useful, and there might be some new questions. We will think also about how it applies to the specific work of academic mentoring and get some feedback to you as well, based on the work that everyone is doing in terms of keeping records, because that's one a big issue for academic mentoring, and the diversity of systems that are around different departments. So it will be great to have some systematic data on that, and for us to continue improving the practice. So
cool. That makes sense.